You're listening to One Free Family, a new take on peaceful parenting, where you can hear ideas for helping to raise free, independent, and peaceful children. Visit onefreefamily.com to connect and listen. Here are your hosts, James and Taylor Davis.
And we're back with another episode of One Free Family. This is James.
And Taylor.
And we are pumped to talk about boredom.
I am so excited.
I'm so excited to talk about boredom today.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm not feeling bored by this subject at all.
I'm actually not bored
I really
by
love
the subject.
talking about boredom.
I thought I was going to to be, but then we started talking about
I know,
it
when
and
I brought
I got
it up,
more excited.
You sat there silently for about 20
I
seconds.
felt bored about it at first.
Thinking it over. But you couldn't come up with anything better, so we're talking about boredom. And I think it's actually a situation that every parent runs into universally, no
every
matter how
person.
Well, I mean, helping other people cope with their boredom is a situation. Yeah, sometimes parenting is boring too, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking mostly about
supporting
helping
our kids through boredom,
through the process of being bored. But before we get to that, exciting news.
We have a new patron,
Vanessa
Vine. Thank you so much. We are so grateful for your support.
We're going last names. You always tell me not to editorialize on the patrons, but I didn't know we were doing last names on our patron today.
Oops.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Anyway, thank you so much, Vanessa. Wink. You know who you are out there. We super appreciate it. As always, all the money so far is going to helping the people behind the scenes that put up the website, distribute the podcast, set up everything in the first place, run the feed, and so on. And it all just shows us how much we're cared for and supported, and we super appreciate it. And even if you don't want to support the show, or you're not in a position to support the show, we'd still love for you to come and join the Facebook group, the One Free Family Facebook group.
We would love that.
I would personally love it. It's still bumping off with lots of topics almost every day, it seems like.
Yeah, great questions, great conversation.
Supporting one another in what I will say is the least judgmental parenting related group that I've ever been a part of.
It might be the least judgmental parenting group that exists.
I haven't been to everywhere on the internet yet.
Me neither, but I'm just going to guess.
But I'm getting there. Every day I chip away more and more, and I'm going to get there someday. So yes, boredom. I think boredom is a really important topic because it's kind of this very bizarre situation where everyone experiences the feeling of boredom, grown-ups, kids, and so forth. When you're a child, the main reaction you get when you express boredom is that is the wrong way to be feeling at that time.
Yeah.
If you're in class, and I mean, heaven forbid you say you're bored in class, your teacher would take incredible offense. Even expressing that to, one's parents around the house might be met with.
Well, yeah, because I think even as a parent, it feels challenging and irritating, to be honest, sometimes when our kids express boredom. And if we respond in an irritated way or frustrated way, that's, again, like more negative feedback on the feeling of being bored.
Well, right, because like when your kid comes to you, like when someone expresses to you that they're bored, I actually think it is pretty natural feeling to be like, shouldn't you do something about that then? Like,
right.
Am I your boredom coach? Should I be the one working you through this boredom? But when it comes to our kids, I think it is important because one way or the other, the feeling of boredom is such a powerful one, and it's such a powerful need that our body expresses to us that, like, when you're feeling really, really bored, it's akin to really having to go to the bathroom or really needing something to eat or really needing some sleep. Like, it's such a powerful feeling that our bodies have evolved to feel. And it just comes from someplace. It's not an instinct, I don't think, that we want to learn to ignore, for instance. I think that's, unfortunately, a really, really common approach that many people use when they work with kids as it relates to boredom. They will try to tell kids to ignore it or fight through it or tell themselves some story about why the boring thing they're doing is going to be important for their future or whatever.
Right.
And sometimes that can be true. And sometimes it's just quite simply not.
And especially in the case of kids, most of the time,
right.
There's really nothing that kids have to persist through boredom doing that is going to be important to their future, I would argue.
No, that's probably true. I mean, what people would say is, and I've heard this, like when I've talked about our summer camp approach, that it's almost good to practice being bored because there's going to be so much boring crap in your life as you grow up.
But as we always say, like, I don't think we need to artificially manufacture
that's true.
Situations that are hard for our kids. And I also don't think we have to try to, like, teach them that lesson of, oh, you're bored doing this thing that we think you should do. Well, you should just keep doing it to learn to be bored. Like that just doesn't, because I don't know. I don't want my kids growing up and choosing to try to spend their time in one way only to find out that it's really unfulfilling and boring to them, and having learned the lesson that they should just keep on going because it's what they've chosen. Boring,
you must keep trying.
Right.
Yeah. And you made a really important distinction when we were discussing the topic earlier. You talked about these kind of two different situations, maybe there are more, but the two big situations that people find themselves in when they start to have this feeling of boredom, right?
Should I break it down?
Yeah, go.
I'll just review each one quick and then we can dive into them. So I think there's, two situations come to mind, like general situations around boredom with kids. The first one is when kids feel bored in a situation that they're kind of stuck in. So that could be kids who are at school in the middle of like a teacher directed lesson that feels really boring to them, but they're just stuck and they have to stay there and keep feeling bored. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then the other situation is a situation in which maybe you're just at home, like with your unschooled or homeschooled kids, or on the weekend, and your kid just comes to you and kind of expresses or is acting in a way that you know that they're just feeling a little bit bored and uninspired and can't really figure out what to engage in next. So that's not a situation where a kid is really like stuck doing something that may be feeling really boring to them. It's more a situation in which they have a ton of freedom of choice and they're just not sure which direction to go.
Yeah, I think that's the important distinction in my mind, which is times where the kid has almost limitless options available to them versus, and just can't choose one, versus being stuck on an airplane on a 6-hour flight. Or because you mentioned being school as an example, but these moments will present
are going to come up even if your kids aren't in
every
school.
Single person's life. They're going to go to the dentist sometime.
You're going to be stuck waiting at a train station like we were in England
that's right.
for a long time.
Even when we were, we just got back from a camping trip and it was super fun. And there were many times where there was no planned activity. There was no, maybe some people were cooking, or one game would sort of naturally die out and kids were kind of looking around for something else to do. And some of the kids expressed feelings of boredom. Other ones kind of moved through it more quickly. But yeah, these moments where there's no obvious, like a kid is in a place that's difficult for them or just a different place than they're normally used to, those will present themselves plenty. So I don't think you need to go to school to learn, to experience that, I guess is my point.
Sure.
But let's talk about, I think the quicker one will be these situations that kids don't choose for themselves, like the train station, like being on an airplane, like they're at the dentist, because in that situation, I feel like you can almost approach it from a place of understanding and empathy. Like,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, like, so here we are, we're at the dentist, like, you feel bored, that's okay. Like,
I understand why you feel bored. This isn't your first choice. So, like we talk about a lot, just validation of that feeling to your child. And if we can show them that it's an understandable feeling to have, and while it's uncomfortable, it's still okay to feel that and okay to express that. And we can reflect back to them that we understand how they're feeling. Sometimes even just that goes a really long way. Yeah,
I think the reflection, this is a listening technique that we learned when we first started working at summer camp, but it can be really helpful here too, which is like, because sometimes people feel bored and trapped in a situation, and then the reaction they get when they express that is one that they're not feeling understood. And that just adds on. Feeling bored is already bad enough. And when you add on someone seeming to have like no understanding whatsoever, like, or they'll say something like, only boring people get bored. Totally not true, by the way. Mostly really exciting people get bored sometimes too. And I think once we acknowledge it and reflect back to them that they feel heard, there are strategies we can use, right? Like, because sometimes you're walking into one of these situations. Like, you're always really good when we go on long plane rides at bringing things that aren't their number one choices that they would have at home. Like, you can't bring, a Fortnite on the plane or something, but you can, or a trampoline, but you can bring markers and little pickup games or
card games.
Yeah, you can brainstorm
tiny containers of Play-Doh or stickers or
brain teasers. And all these little things. So like when you're knowingly walking into these situations, preparing yourself and understanding yourself, like, okay, my kid feeling bored isn't a sign that I failed them here. This isn't, we will get through it. Everything is going to be okay. And just how can I support them? Maybe some yummy snacks, maybe, these other little diversionary things. Make sure I bring headphones for the jack in the airplane or whatever.
And I think knowing what type of situation you're going into and knowing how your kids typically react to that situation is so helpful. So like, let's say you're going into a situation where you're even getting together with a ton of friends and your kids are really excited. But maybe you also know that one of your kids in particular wears out on the really, really active, intense, loud, energetic play after a while. And history has shown that that child will, at a certain point, hit their limit and will express some boredom to you. So thinking ahead about that and knowing that that will happen, then you can have some strategies and ideas in place to help that child move through that feeling. And it'll look different for every child. Maybe, like you said, James, maybe it's having some good snacks so they can take a break, or maybe if it's having a book that they like that they can go off and read, or an iPad that they can go off and play for a little bit, or it's just maybe if you're there with them, you stop whatever you're doing and take a little break and engage in a game with them. Something just to going into a situation knowing how, like, that you have some strategies to help.
Yeah, and I think here expectations can help as well. I think with kids, at least I've noticed, with our son who is more inclined to express boredom in situations like that, the person who wears out on those social gatherings the quickest in our family, when he has expectations around when that will be over, that helps for him too, because I think it actually helps him enjoy being there. Because when you're in those boring situations that you didn't choose for yourself, is wondering, like, when will this be over? Like, am I just going to be, because like I know when, for instance, when I'm at the mechanic and it could take 15 minutes or an hour, that feels so bad versus if I
just have no clue.
Yeah, if I just knew it was going to be an hour, then I could just inhabit that mental space and kind of work through it. And, you know, maybe I'd be pleasantly surprised if it was a little bit earlier or whatever.
And I think the plus side, another plus side of kind of going in with some strategies to help your kid through that is that you're also modeling for them, like, how to deal with boredom, right? You're modeling for them kind of how to sit with that feeling, how to not beat themselves up for feeling that way by not getting down on them ourselves for feeling that way. And then also, like, how to find a way to re-engage with something that feels good to you. So we're kind of like modeling all those steps for them. And as they get older, like with our oldest, we can even start having conversations with them about what is that feeling of boredom like? How do we recognize when it's happening? And then, like, what are some things that we can do to help ourselves sit with it and move through it? And they can start thinking about what might work for them and take a little bit more ownership of that with our support as they grow. Yeah,
I think recognizing the feeling as it arises is just one of the most powerful techniques that anyone can use for many different feelings that come into their life. And boredom is certainly no different there. And it's something that's worked really well with Ollie. Not actually pertaining to boredom specifically, but other strong reactions to things that then he would like to have control over or strong feelings about things that then he would like to have more control over the reaction.
Right.
Which is to say, oh, here comes the feeling of boredom. Here comes the feeling of anger. Here comes the feeling of frustration. Recognizing, almost naming it as it's approaching. Mm-hmm. And then the next question would be, where is it coming from? Am I in any, like, danger, you know? Like, 'cause your body is going to tell you sometimes, like, I'm so bored, I want to cry. That happened to your cousin at your graduation. I remember when you graduated.
My college graduation? Yeah. That's pretty boring.
I wanted to cry too, but she was the only one that let it loose. But it's, but yeah, so helping them it's almost a meditative practice.
Yeah, it's a mindfulness practice.
Letting it come in and letting it pass through. Because I think that is a strategy as well that I've worked with one of our sons on, which is, okay, so here comes that feeling of boredom. We'll recognize it. This is why it's happening right now. And what will we do next? Because what we do know is that sitting around just talking about how bored we are rarely cures our boredom. And I think that's I want to be delicate there because you don't want to dismiss the feeling of boredom or not acknowledge it. But I think once you reflect back, once you help them notice and name the emotion, especially if they're not naming it themselves, then we can move through to, okay, so what next? We're still going to be at this party for another hour. We did bring your iPad. What are you thinking? It seems like you've had fun doing this with your friends in the past. It looks like Ava's not doing anything.
Somebody, yeah.
Maybe she would want to play that game of Family that you guys have played in the past or whatever. And then that way we can be partners along the journey of being bored rather than, because I think it is a fine line between always being the entertaining clown. That was my instinct when I was like running camp. And you helped me work through this early in our kids' life too, where I was like, oh, he's bored. Literally like get on a wig and like be a performer, you know?
Well, I think there's something to be said for that speaks to the importance of also working on our own feelings around boredom.
Yeah.
So, and our own kind of like baggage around boredom, because if we have come to internalize boredom as a really, really awful and scary thing that we want to push away as much as we can, then I think our instinct with our kids will be one in which we maybe, like you said, kind of try to jump in super fast and just solve it real quick because it's so deeply uncomfortable for us. So I think there's some, as I feel like I say this about almost everything we talk about, there's some level of kind of self-reflection and self-work that we need to do around boredom so that we can get to a place where like we can sit with our kids with their boredom and not want to crawl out of our skin and not want to be that like entertaining clown the second they seem bored, and understand that like it's not our responsibility to be their entertainers. Of course, it's our responsibility to provide them with a rich environment, lots of options and inspiration and ideas, but we don't have to jump in, like you said, and do the song and dance the minute they feel a little bored. We can kind of partner with them through that feeling instead.
Yeah, it's funny. I think my experience, my instinct there comes from having spent so much time working in the summer camp environment where actually if people are bored there, it kind of is my responsibility to unboard them because it's so bad for business. Like camp for me isn't the place where I want kids constantly having to work through boredom.
No, you don't want them going home saying that they felt bored most of the time. Yeah, that is really different.
Even if they like ultimately learn some good coping skills for boredom, not the purpose of why their parents paid a bunch of money to send them to sleep.
So maybe that's why for you in parenting that kind of carried through until you worked through it and recognized it.
And it's why when kids in my care are bored, it feels like failing. And I need to recognize that because it's not sustainable for me. What I found very quickly is I don't think it's good for the kid. And I'm also not interested in being in the entertainer / song and dance
that's
man
no way to live
for the next 18 more years or whatever. Right. Like that's just not going to work. And so I think we're actually segueing nicely into that other kind of boredom that you mentioned. The kind where your kid actually does have options.
And they're kind of in their normal, super comfortable environment.
Right. Yeah, like that position that every person is going to find themselves in thousands of times from now until the time they die, which is, I don't have anything I must do at this time.
Right.
What should I do next? Now, sometimes it's something is very obvious, like your friend just came over and they want to do something, so you guys just jump right into the games you like to play. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's 2 p.m. and you're tired and
you've kind of like done all the things that felt most appealing to you up until that point. Yeah,
your daily list of things you like the most in your house, you've kind of done those, and now it's the afternoon and you walk in and you say, oh, I'm so bored right now. Yeah. So where do we go from there?
Yeah. So again, I think the first step is checking in with ourselves, right? And how that feels to us as parents to have our kid come seek us out at home and say that they're feeling bored, and just kind of checking in and making sure that we can continue to work towards getting to a place where we respond to that with empathy and understanding. I've seen this go around in like other kind of more mainstream parenting groups online and things where people talk about the response to that when their kids express boredom is to say something like, well, you're bored? Here, I can give you some chores to do. Then you won't be so bored. You're making a face.
Well, I'm making a face because like if someone comes to you with a feeling as powerful as boredom and they want to talk to you about it, they might be just like complaining, and there might be a stack of dishes in your sink. And you're like, I would kill to be bored right now. Like that's a feeling I've had sometimes. Like I could think of 50,000 things I would do if I had literally no responsibilities.
Right.
So it's hard to empathize. But I think we have to take a step back. That's basically a punishment for someone sharing their feelings.
Yeah, it is, for someone coming and seeking you out. And not only is it a punishment, but it's just so invalidating to them and their experience. So I think being able to respond again with empathy and understanding and asking some questions to get some more information to see if we can figure out, like we talked about, kind of helping them figure out what are like the underlying needs that they're having, right, that are leading to boredom, because it could be different for different kids in different situations, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll get to that little checklist, that little mental checklist that we run through in situations like that. I, again, like to start with the reflective listening, something along the lines of, because bored just can mean so many different things, but I'll start with something like, oh, so you're having trouble finding something that's interesting for you right now.
Right.
And then they can say, oh, yeah, I'm feeling so bored. And if they seem like upset about it, because sometimes they're just mentioning it casually around the kitchen table, like, I'm bored. Yeah. And that's very different than, oh, I'm so bored right now.
Feeling really distraught.
Yeah, so if they feel distraught, I will tell them, just in the same way they have a terrible stomachache, but they actually just need to go to the bathroom. Like, I'll just let them know, hey, boredom is just actually a signal from your mind and body that it's looking for a change right now. That's totally normal. Yeah. Everyone feels this way
Help
sometimes.
To normalize that feeling.
Yeah, don't worry. And I'm sure that this feeling will pass at some point, and it's very uncomfortable, and I hear you. You know? And that sounds, it almost, I don't know if it sounds patronizing or what, but it just is like, it's an accurate description of what's going on, and I think it can help the kid, again, recenter themselves, because if they're in that panic state, like quiet down those the next thing.
Right, like it can help to quiet down those alarm bells that might be going off in their head due to the discomfort of the feeling of boredom. Just to hear, you know, this is just a message that you're looking for a change, and everybody experiences this, and let's work on it together.
Right on. So the mental checklist we can go through now. I think this is going to be different for every kid, and different kids are going to have ones or parts of this list that they frequent more often. Yeah. So, and at different times in their life. So, like I mentioned, being tired earlier. Being tired, I feel like, is such a catalyst for boredom, because your mind, when it's at its sharpest and most active, is able to think about the next thing, or feels like it has the energy to initiate the next activity. Or, you know, maybe go next door and ring the doorbell, or like do these things that might be a little bit uncomfortable that will bridge the now to the next activity. But being tired is just a classic one. If people are tired, they're just more likely to feel bored.
Yep.
So what's a big one that you've noticed?
I think another one that I hear people talk about sometimes, and I think it happens with our kids sometimes too, is just maybe a child feeling like a need for a connection with one of their most trusted people. So if they've, even by choice, been doing kind of their own thing for most of the day, and they come to you or to me with a feeling of boredom, sometimes I have to check in and think like, oh, could they just really use some really focused time to connect with me, or with one of their siblings, or with you, or with their grandma who's next door, or something like that. So sometimes just like some quality time spent with one of their closest people can really help to like revitalize them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, actually. I think I often think about that. The way introversion and extroversion is discussed these days is in terms of like, are you around, like, does being around other people fill you up, or do you recharge better when you're on your own? I actually think that sort of thought applies to boredom too, where and my personal take on the introvert-extrovert question is that most people just need a mix of both. And that sometimes even introverts will need to connect with others to recharge that aspect of themselves. And I think our kids are no different. Particularly, your more extroverted kid might get bored more when, you know, especially if they're normally surrounded by tons of kids, like let's say they go to school, they might feel like, ooh, like I really could use that interpersonal connection that I crave. And on the flip side, your introverted kid might call it boredom when you have a bunch of people over and they're getting too many questions from all the aunts and uncles. They're getting too much, and too many invitations.
They're craving that quiet that they really thrive on.
And so they're sitting there like, you know, I can remember being at the Thanksgiving table, as connected as I could possibly want to be to all the people around the table, but really just wanting to go and like just watch sports for a minute. You know?
Yeah, but I think that's why I also specified like connection with even one-on-one connection with a trusted person. Like I think sometimes, especially when we're maybe parents at home, one parent at home with multiple kids, just doing that checklist in my own head of like, have I really had like a good solid time of connection with this child today? Because if I haven't, that's a good place to start.
Yeah. And oftentimes that will be one of the more interesting and different parts of the day. When you have one-on-one time with someone, it's a great time for creative play or other creative
exploring
endeavors.
Something new you're interested in or whatever.
Or collaborating. Like if you do play, say, video games with your kid, maybe you guys can run in and kind of be in there together, working and try to solve some problem. That can be really good. I think another one that comes up probably more now than it has in the past is like a need for physical activity. I think our bodies are wired not just to seek out new and interesting experiences, but also to be used.
and to move,
And since there are so many engaging more sedentary activities these days, that sometimes kids are just bouncing off the walls and their body is telling them, nope, this isn't quite it. Like, we do need to move at some point today. And again, they're ascribing it to boredom. I mean, it might look more like restlessness. That might be a more precise way. But for kids with a limited vocabulary, like, if you notice, like, the two different body languages I'll look for is, does the kid come in, collapse onto the couch and tell me that he's bored? Or does he come in and kind of hop around the table telling me how bored he is?
Or did, like, what was happening before they came and told you they were bored? Were they doing something, you know, maybe sedentary that they were super, super engaged with? Or were they doing something sedentary, but you could hear, you know, by their behavior and their conversation that they really kind of had fallen out of flow with it and it wasn't engaging them very much. And that's a good signal to me that, like, whatever that thing was has kind of lost its luster for the moment. And if it was a more sedentary thing, they potentially could really be revitalized by some active play.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, though, like, for me, one of the key aspects of helping kids work through boredom is to do my best. And I don't know if you even agree with this, because I know we have tried both things here, but is to do my best to not tell a kid that they're bored. And that's, like, a tricky situation because, you know, like, sometimes it will seem like a kid is falling out of interest with a certain activity, right? And, like, you'll see this especially when a group of kids are playing and one kid seems to be, like, not as into the activity anymore. So it could be like, maybe it's an imaginary game and that's not their biggest thing, or it's a sport and that's not their greatest interest, or maybe they're all playing a video game together and they're kind of falling out of interest with that. In those situations, my head tells me that it's probably best to let kids elect to stop doing the thing, even if they seem bored, because, you know, there might be some other priorities there. Like, yeah, they don't love the activity, but they still just want to be doing it with everyone and, you know, want to still feel connected in that way. But what do you think? I mean, what do we do when we can, quote unquote, tell that our kid is bored?
I think
what's the best way to handle that?
I think it depends on the situation. I mean, I think we can, I think there are times when we can kind of just let them keep doing what they're doing so that they can have the experience themselves of, like, recognizing when they really hit their limit. And I think people learn better just by experiencing than being told. But again, like, boredom with when you're doing an activity with a bunch of other people, I know for kids sometimes boredom can start to manifest as making it really hard for everybody else to have fun doing the activity. So if I notice that happening with my kids, I am going to talk to them and try to help them move through that, because it's just really, unless I notice the other kids trying on their own and being effective at it, like, I'm just going to be pretty uncomfortable watching my child make it really hard for everybody else to keep having the fun that they were having because they're getting bored of what they're doing. So,
yeah, I think sometimes it's almost manifesting as that kid trying to change the activity.
Right.
And sometimes that can look like we've seen it from all of our kids, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
That where, like, you know, one of our kids isn't as interested in those, like, imaginary, free-flowing, like, let's just go with it and find out what happens games. Like, he might come in and when he starts getting bored, he might try to make it very goal oriented. He might make it
right, and stop the game to have more conversations about, like, the rules
the
and
physics of the game. Yeah. And it's not as obviously as destructive as, like, oh, we're all playing a board game and now the one kid is climbing on my back.
Right.
Or moving the pieces around or something like that. But I think it is nice. I actually think you're 100% right, where that's almost an invitation to connect with that kid and help them to at least see, like, oh, hey, it seems like everyone else is still interested in playing. Maybe, I don't know, though. It's so close because, like, that feels like something that kids should be able to work out on their own.
I think you give them a chance to work it out, right? I think you step back and wait a little bit and see what happens. And then if it really goes off the rails, then you step in. And if they sort it out, they sort it out. And that's great, too. And I think if you do get to the point where you feel the need to step in an ideal world, I would always do that by, like you said, connecting with the kid who seems bored and who's kind of being disruptive. I don't always do that. I more often than I would like, get a little more reactive than that. But as I keep working towards my goals for myself as a parent, I would hope to kind of, like, get down on that kid's level with them, try to do it in a way that doesn't too blatantly call them out in front of everybody else and embarrass them, and just try to redirect them or engage them in something interesting with me, something to kind of help everybody out without making it a bigger conflict. It's easier said than done, but
yeah. But I think it's okay to point out, like, if you just notice it and say, like, you could even ask,
hey, are you still having fun with this? Or
yeah, like, are you still having fun with this? Or, hey, I'm going to go walk the dog with your baby brother. Do you want to come with us?
Yeah.
When this round is over, or something like that, kind of reminding them that there are other possibilities.
Right. They're not like stuck doing this thing. They can make a change.
Yeah. Cause I think also, it's tricky because especially in groups of like more polite kids, sometimes they will let that person kind of knock everything off the rails, or they'll like, repeatedly try to tolerate it. Like, come on, like, we're all trying to do this. Mm-hmm. We don't want a bunch of rules for this game right now. Like, we're just trying to go, but it can just suck the life out of the activity completely.
Yeah.
When your own kids are involved in that, you want to be empathetic towards that too. So, yeah. So noticing and going from there. We said we were going to lay out a checklist, but we just kind of talked about a bunch of scenarios. But I think that's still pretty good.
Yeah. And I think also when you're thinking about your home environment and kids, especially if you are living a life where your kids are pretty self-directed and free to do their thing for a lot of the time. I know for me at home, when one of my kids comes to me expressing boredom, again, like I have this gut reaction sometimes of judging myself and feeling like it's a failure on my part. Like if I was a better mom and a better homeschooling/unschooling mom, my kids would never get bored because I would have this like amazing environment for them where they would never run out of ideas and inspiration and things to do. And like I still go there quite frequently in my own head, because when we're taking the responsibility for our kids completely into our own hands for their day to day, it can feel like a lot of pressure. And for me, I can get caught up sometimes in the anxiety of like, am I doing it right? Am I offering them enough? So when they come to me bored, that can really like illuminate for me those anxieties that I can have sometimes, or those doubts or questions. So I have to be gentle with myself and check in and think like, well, is this environment lacking for them? If it is, what can I do to fix it? Or are they just having a normal feeling of boredom that everybody is going to experience at some point in their lives? And more often than not, that's really what it is. Because I know logically that I work pretty hard to notice what their interests are and provide them with more opportunities. So being able to kind of check in with how that feels for me is really helpful. And I think when it comes to being around the home also, I like to try to just have some sort of, whether it's written down, like for me, I have a little note in my phone, but some sort of kind of backup list of ideas of things that might be interesting to do for my kid based on, for each of the kids if they express boredom, right? So if I can like take note of questions they've asked in the past that we haven't had time in the moment to fully research and explore. And sometimes I can find like a YouTube video that speaks to that interest. And I can be like, oh, I had found this video a while ago and I haven't had the chance to show it to you. Yeah. Do you want to check it out with me? And just like having a little backup list of things that might be engaging for your kid, that after you kind of reflect and validate and sit with them through that boredom, you can have an offering. Yeah,
I think that's great. I know you talked earlier about the idea of setting our kids up for success. Like when you're going out into a situation that is fairly likely to be boring, it's also fairly likely that at some point in your home, things will feel boring. So acknowledging that and not acknowledging it as not a failure, but that's a great time for, those little things that normally don't capture everyone's attention. Like with our kids and with us, it's important to acknowledge that like sometimes there are things that are so fun and so engaging that people will turn to those first, but it doesn't mean they're incapable of or not interested in anything else.
Right.
But that's like a perfect time when the kid comes out and says, oh man, I'm having trouble finding something to do. It'd be like, oh, well, hey, we were really enjoying that Wild Robot book that we were reading last night in bed. Do you want to hop on the porch and, make some smoothies and read that together?
Right.
Oh, sounds great. Or, hey, the other day you talked about wanting to jump on the trampoline, but it was raining and now the weather's actually really nice. And I noticed some neighborhood kids are outside. Maybe you could go invite them to go jump on the trampoline. But yeah, like having something in the back of your mind, almost reminders rather than, again, being the guy with the Rolodex of fun activities that you're going to run. But yeah, having those reminders, I think, is super helpful.
Yeah. And I'd throw in a little kind of disclaimer there too, that sometimes your child, like sometimes I think our child's boredom is going to persist and our ideas maybe won't work for them in the moment. And that's okay too. Like, we can have this kind of like little backup list of possible things to offer them in our minds, and maybe offer it with the understanding that we need to kind of like put expectations on hold, that one of them is going to like work and solve the problem. Like, sometimes they may feel bored and they just kind of may be in a funk, and it just, our ideas none of them might sound good. And that's okay, because that feeling also just won't last forever.
Yeah, we have to be ready to just walk away without this particular problem being solved, because it's not like hunger where you can just hand them some food.
Right. Right.
Ultimately it's a very complicated signal from the brain that is saying, and there's some interesting articles on this on Psychology Today and elsewhere, but basically saying, we want to experiencing something novel in this sort of, and I can't even put my finger on what it is. And it's a really tricky thing to help someone work through. I do think, again, in the vein of helping set people up for success, one thing I've tried to do is notice when those lulls tend to happen in our house. In our house, it tends to be between, like, say, 1 and 3 p.m. Before that, everyone still has a full head of steam from just all the morning things they often like to do. And after that, I feel like, there's typically more people around in the neighborhood. Their bodies don't seem to be as tired for whatever reason.
Or that's the time of day that we head out to do something on a lot of days.
Yeah, so that can be a perfect time, again, to go over to grandma's, or or for us to make plans, like, instead of planning things at 10 o'clock when they're going to be right in the middle of all the things they like best, around right after lunchtime when those things aren't as available as much, is a great time.
Or aren't as engaging.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's what I mean. It's a great time to go out, because I like to go out. I like to go see our friends and all those other things. And I like to not pull them away from the things they like too. And so oftentimes, frankly, too, just car rides are a nice time to just reset mentally. It's like, there's nowhere to go. I'm just in this car for a little bit, and they can kind of just like, unwind for a second, like, almost in a physical way. They can just like relax. They don't have to feel the need to, or feel the pressure to find something to do. I think that can, especially for one of our kids, that can feel overwhelming for him sometimes. And, just kind of making it so they don't have to make decisions all day can be, I think, especially for younger kids that aren't going to have as much experience in repetitions, planning out their whole day, all day, every day. That can be helpful too.
Sure.
Cool. So I think this will be on the shorter end of our episodes. Hope it didn't bore you.
It's a good one.
Do you get it though?
I got it. Yeah. It's good.
It was pretty awesome. Anyways, thanks for coming along this boredom journey with us. I do think it's a funner topic than maybe some other people do. I hope you all enjoyed it too. As always, if you have any thoughts or things you want to share, or questions you're working through, or bigger topics that you're kind of working through. Also, if you have any guests you think might want to be on the show, we are equipped to interview guests and to have bigger discussions with people besides the ones in our own house. We are now capable of doing that thanks to mostly the patrons who have supported the show, helping Roger and his team get that third-party software set up. So if you have any thoughts, head on over to the One Free Family group and let us know. Yeah,
I'd love to know, actually, maybe I'll post a prompt. I'd love to know what you do when your kids come to you with boredom. Ooh. If anybody has some ideas or suggestions that work really well for them and their family, I would love to hear some additional ideas as well to add to my own toolbox.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say you wanted to hear guest suggestions.
Our listeners' suggestions. Right. And our group members, yeah.
I know. And I thought you were going to ask them for suggestions on who we should bring on as guests onto the show. Oh, no, you already did that. I know. But okay. I thought you were going to do the same thing. All right. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. And remember that every moment is a new chance to be the parent you want to be. I love you guys. Some more than others. See you next time. Thank you for listening to One Free Family. If you enjoy the podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron at onefreefamily.com/support. Your support will help make this show better. Plus, you can get access to rewards and additional episodes by joining. Again, that's onefreefamily.com/support. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.